thanks for helping us do this today, Andy.
Yeah, my pleasure. You know what cornucopia means, don't you?
Uh-oh.
You're using a word you don't know what it means. Horn of plenty.
Yes.
That's its meaning. And so there's the plenty. That's our word that's very similar to bounty. The English word bounty has Latin roots in words for good and goodness. And from these we get words like bounty, bonus. The meaning of the word bounty has been kind of culturally skewed to bring to mind things like monetary reward as an incentive. Like in the Old West, the wanted posters were put up with bounties to motivate people to help catch the criminal. And so if someone had a bounty on their head, that had a negative connotation, at least for the person on whose head it was placed, because it increased the likelihood that people would be hunting for them. So, and then people think of historical account of the mutiny on the Bounty. That was a British ship in the late 18th century. And yet others just think of paper towels.
Thanks a lot.
Quicker picker-upper,
So what
go ahead.
What I was going to add to that is that a very simple, in the New Testament, a very simple explanation or definition had to do with the idea of benefit or largeness.
Right.
Thanksgiving time, we won't resist the idea of largeness, especially after we're done eating. But what I am, but when you were talking about a bounty on someone's head, the reason they could use that word is that there was a benefit or large amount of money that was put on somebody's head. In the New Testament, and we'll look at a few verses in just a few minutes, though, sometimes the word that we're thinking of, bounty or bountiful, has been translated blessed. And so if you enlarge something, or you receive that, you realize that you've received something large, you were blessed.
Yeah. And so even the paper towel, it's supposed to absorb a whole lot more. That was the whole idea. You could soak up a whole lot more with your bounty paper towels, or if you name a ship a bounty, well, it's because it's helping your nation to accomplish and bring in great trade or great wealth, through its navy or whatever. So it has a positive connotation, but sometimes we kind of put a negative spin on it. It's oftentimes associated with the wealth of kings. I got an example for us here before we get into the Psalms. 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 13, where here it's talking about Solomon, and the occasion is the Queen of Sheba visiting, and King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, and she and her servants. So here you had a bunch of royals sharing their bounty with one. She brought gifts, he's returning gifts, and we won't take the time to go and look in the book of Esther. But again, the feasts that are described there, both at the beginning of the book of Esther, when Vashti is invited in, and then later when he gives, Ahasuerus gives a feast for the Esther, the word bounty is used in conjunction with like a lot of people are celebrating, on Thanksgiving Day. The harvest has come in, and we're enjoying ourselves with all that God has blessed us with. So there's the physical aspect of the word bounty, but there's obviously, from a spiritual perspective, it then refers to the plenteous blessings that God graciously showers upon mankind, from the physical to the spiritual. So at a time of Thanksgiving, when people's minds are on these kinds of things, it's good for us to think about and find encouragement in the bounty that we enjoy from God.
I think that sometimes it's awkward for us when we take a look at how much bounty we have, how God has enlarged us, especially physically, compared to some other people in the world or even in this nation. And I think we need to keep that in the proper perspective. We'll talk about that a little bit more near the end of this lesson today, but I want to bring out a psalm, Psalm 142, which is a prayer of David when he cries out to the Lord and pours out his heart. He is not being blessed very much at the time that he says this, but he's crying out to the Lord, telling God that he's his refuge. But I want to point out something very interesting, and it occurs several times in the Psalms. This is Psalm 142 and verse 7. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me, for you shall deal bountifully with me. Throughout the Psalms, there is this confidence first that even though things aren't going right, that we can still look beyond that and see blessing from God, and that God will bless us. Sometimes it's a matter of waiting for physical blessing to come, and sometimes physical blessing never comes, and we see spiritual blessing that hasn't been touched by the physical suffering that has happened. But there is also something that you should listen to in the Psalms, and that often, and usually it's David, he says, do this for me, bless me bountifully, so that I can praise you, so that others will see and praise and glorify you, so that I can sing. Let me live longer, let me live better, so that your name can be glorified. I really find that a very uplifting, that we can look at the blessings that we have and not only thank God, but use them to his honor and glory.
Sure. Yeah. And of course, we could go to a host of the Psalms. The Psalms are really good at bringing out what an acknowledgement of what God has done for us in so many ways. I'm gonna use Psalm 112, and I know, David, you may have a couple others, but I'm going to read the entire Psalm. Praise the Lord. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. His descendants will be mighty on earth. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches will be in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. Unto the upright there arises light in the darkness. He is gracious and full of compassion and righteous. A good man deals graciously and lends. He will guide his affairs with discretion. Surely he will never be shaken. The righteous will be in everlasting remembrance. He will not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. His heart is established. He will not be afraid until he sees his desire upon his enemies. He has dispersed abroad. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. His horn will be exalted with honor. The wicked will see it and be grieved. He will gnash his teeth and melt away. The desire of the wicked shall perish. So it begins by just making the observation that blessed is the one who fears the Lord. When we put our trust, our faith, our confidence in God, then blessings pour forth. Now, this shouldn't be misunderstood to be talking about what some people kind of refer to as a kind of a health and wealth prosperity gospel. It looks beyond these things. Nevertheless, God has so ordered the world that if we follow him and we use his wisdom and we apply these things to our lives, that in general, things will go better for us. Many exceptions to that. David himself finds himself being chased down, hunted down in dire circumstances, pleading for God's help. And so that is evidence right there of the fact that that doesn't mean that things will always go wonderfully and there will never be any suffering or any pain or any poverty. But nevertheless, do we then renounce God, or do we just continue to sing to God and put our trust and our confidence that in time, whether in this life or after this life, God's abundant blessings are going to be poured forth on us? And I think that we see here in this psalm The fact that his heart, verse 8, is established, he will not be afraid. We're not afraid of the many things that are going on in life, and that's in itself a bountiful blessing that God gives us. That the world, we talked about this, I don't know if it was in the last week or not, but the fact that the world is anxious, so anxious about so many things that are going on. We don't need to follow the world and its anxieties. I'm not saying there's never a time to be concerned and to act on those concerns, but we do so in a non-worldly way because we have God at our back, undergirding us and giving us this hope of ultimate blessing. And that ought to be what encourages us even in the low times, like they did with David when he was on the run from Saul.
There is this peace, this calmness that we're able to have because we have confidence in God. And when we look at God's bounty toward his people historically, when we look at what God has done toward his people in the New Testament and bringing salvation, it ought to provide this peace in us, whatever we're experiencing. Psalm 116 and verse 7, return to your rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. And by the way, this isn't just saying go take a nap after you have turkey today, but this is saying that when we look out and we see such blessing, and by the way, that blessing may be physical as you see that table full of food, your grandchildren or your children running around and feeling that great blessing. Maybe it's friends and family, or maybe you don't have family and brothers and sisters in Christ and neighbors that are doing good to you. You can find rest in that, even in situations that are not very restful, realizing that God has dealt bountifully with you. But Psalm 116 goes on to talk about what he calls this cup of salvation that had been poured out for him. And in the New Testament, we recognize even more fully that God has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in the heavenly places, Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3. It's hard to wrap our minds around that, all spiritual blessings in the heavenly places. Every spiritual blessing that heaven contains has been poured out, given to us. When we're thinking about bounty, you want to talk bounty here, you want to talk about fullness, largeness, benefit. This is something that is unbelievably encouraging. And when we're counting our blessings, maybe the table wasn't as full of food, or maybe you couldn't even have a special meal today. Maybe it is that you have weren't able to get together with family, or maybe you have no family. Maybe it is that things, as Andy was talking about, aren't always going well in your life. But this is saying that there's still that word blessing, all spiritual blessings. That's a bounty word. It's sometimes translated bountiful, bounty. Sometimes it's translated blessing, but it's that idea of benefit and largeness. And he's saying that is yours to be had. Your table is full. You do have family in this world, and certainly in heaven, and they are, and you have blessings like maybe nobody else has had throughout all history. So it's really an amazing thing, and that gives us not only as I read before, a rest to our souls, but it flows out of us. And Andy, I think you were going to talk a little bit about how when we have these overflowing, bountiful largeness of blessings, it's going to flow from us.
Yeah, go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and I'm going to begin with verse 5. It's kind of a longer reading, but I think it's good for us to see the flow of thought. He said, therefore, Paul's writing, of course, I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time, that's the church in Corinth, and prepare your bountiful gift beforehand, which you had previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudging or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, have an abundance for every good work. As it is written, he has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor. His righteousness remains forever. And by the way, that's a quote from Psalm 112 that we were just in. He says, now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through us to God. For the administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through many thanksgivings to God. While through the proof of this ministry, they glorify God for the obedience of your confession to the gospel of Christ and for your liberal sharing with them and all men, and by their prayer for you who long for you because of the exceeding grace of God in you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. So God's blessings are supposed to prompt thanksgiving to God and prompt our own sharing of that bounty that God has blessed us with other people. As a bountiful gift. And he uses to observe that he who sows bountifully will then, of course, reap bountifully. Now, notice that Paul says that God is able. He goes on from that point to say that God is able. We may question our own ability to be a blessing to other people, but let us acknowledge that God is able. God is able to make grace, which really is a word that is used in the place of blessing, the ability to bless. He's able to make grace abound toward us. So just as God supplies what is needed in nature to accomplish a bountiful harvest, so he is able to enrich us to be liberal in our blessing, which causes thanksgivings to God. So again, at a time of national thanksgiving for the bounty which God has supplied, we need to be encouraged to imitate God in being bountiful blessings for others, in the things that are even more important than material prosperity. See, God enriches us not for ourselves, but for us to be liberal with it. So the end sought is not just the alleviating of physical needs among saints, although that is what he's talking about here, and certainly not the glory that might accrue to us because we are the givers, but the glory that comes to God, whose grace made it all possible.
Yeah, we're entering a season where I think we have to warn about covetousness and maybe just thinking about ourselves and our own. And here we are at the end of Thanksgiving Day, maybe thinking, I should have used my blessing to sow bountifully. Instead, I sowed sparingly. But it's not too late. I don't mean it's not too late today, but it's not too late for you to be thinking about how you can use your blessings, both physical and spiritual, for the good of others. And I want to encourage you to think outside the box, not only about your own bounty, but about those who have needs. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 9 is the kind of well-known verse that says that we're not to be rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing. This verse is encouraging us to look outside of the good people in our circle, outside our own circle that we like to be around, of people we like to be around, and think about the people who aren't as they ought to be, maybe even people who pose themselves as our enemies. And it says that we're to be blessing them. This is the same word, showing bounty toward them, giving them more than they deserve or that most people maybe would. But interesting, it says, knowing that you were thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing. The problem with blessing other people is that it feels like if we enlarge them, then it ensmalls us or something like that. It makes us have less when we enlarge other people. But this verse says just the opposite. So when we bless, when we enlarge others, actually we are being called not only to do that, but we are called to inherit a blessing. I think the implication is largeness, even more. I remember one time there was somebody that my dad knew that was very well off financially, and he gave my dad something, I can't remember what, and he was known for being very charitable. And my dad said, well, how do you do it? And he said, well, God shovels it in and I shovel it out, and God has a bigger shovel. That really stuck with me. I think sometimes we feel like if we give a blessing to others, whether it's physical or spiritual, forgiveness and kindness and love, that somehow or other, we are going to have less or experience less of that in our lives, even of the spiritual things. And God says, no, you're going to inherit a blessing, and that largeness, that benefit is greater than anything that you can give away.
Those thoughts fit really well with what I was going to follow up with from 2 Corinthians. I was in 2 Corinthians 9 before, but let's go back to chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians. I'm going to begin reading with verse 1. He says, moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we had hoped, but first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. So we urge Titus that as he had begun, so he would complete this grace in you as well. But as you abound in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and all diligence, and in your love for us, see that you abound in this grace also. And there's more that we could keep reading all the way on to verse 14. But Paul was encouraging the saints in Corinth to follow through on being generous as they originally had planned to do a year previously. So he's kind of reminding them. And, many of us are oftentimes emotionally moved in moments of need, but we don't always follow through accordingly. And so, interestingly, Paul refers here to the opportunity to give to other saints in their material need. He refers to that as the grace of God. So we recognize grace as blessing or bounty given by God to sinners as being motivated by his love and mercy for us or toward us. So we typically think of grace as a benefit for us, but it doesn't stop there. It extends to forming us into what God created us to be, and that is to be like him. And so grace is also blessing or bounty which we extend to others as we imitate God in love and in mercy. And so Paul here uses the churches in Macedonia as exemplary to the church in Corinth of the bounty that we can bestow. But you go on to read, note the negatives that they faced. He talks about great trial of affliction and deep poverty and their limited ability. But then you notice the positives that accompanied them there: abundance of joy, liberality, or willing hearts, imploring grace. Those words are all used there. These saints begged Paul to share in the gift or grace or blessing of serving fellow saints in other places whom they had never met. How were they able to do that, we ask? You're telling the story there about your father asking that one man, how are you able to do that? The answer Paul gives right here is they first gave themselves to the Lord. That's how they were able to do it. They gave themselves entirely to the Lord, and the Lord enabled them. He gave them the ability. So being encouraged by the grace that we have found in Jesus Christ, they wanted to share that bounty with others. They wanted to share that with their brethren. They were encouraged to do so, and we ought to be as well.
Let me just say one more thing, and then Andy, I'll let you close us out with any last comments that you have. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. Verse 8 says, now godliness with contentment is great gain. This is clearly linking physical and spiritual. It's not disconnecting physical and spiritual. Some people think it's disconnecting. Hey, don't care about the physical and only the spiritual. But this is actually saying that godliness connected with a proper attitude about physical things is what makes contentment possible. I started reading in verse 6, but if you skip on down to verse 8, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. So, by the way, when we have more than food and clothing, which I think most of us do, that ought to kind of create in us a feeling of great bounty, and maybe a red flag reminding us that we need to make sure that we are being content with godliness, that we recognize the bountiful blessing that we have in godliness. One more verse in Hebrews 13, let your conduct be without covetous, Hebrews 13:5. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself said, what's God going to say here? That's going to make us content with the things that we have in our, and not need to be greedy or covetous or materialistic. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? That's one of those goosebumps passages. It gives me this. This is great. This is amazing what God has given to me. The bounty that I have in Christ Jesus, through Christ, the forgiveness of sins, the hope, this incredible expression of love. You know, you're going to talk about. I started off saying that we need to sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountifully to me. Psalm 13 and verse 6. If anybody can sing to the Lord because He's dealt bountiful with me, it's me, and it's you who are Christians. And I hope this is a sing to the Lord, has been a sing to the Lord sort of day for you.
Right. And we hope that you will continue to sing the praises of the God who has blessed us richly. And whether or not that has been realized in your life materially, and to what degree it has been realized in your life, understand that your greatest riches and your greatest bounty is found in the grace of God that has been demonstrated to us through Jesus Christ. And so let us give thanks to God, and in doing so, remember to spread that grace to other people, the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, because that is the bounty that is most encouraging. It's been great to be with you on this day.